Okay, welcome everybody to today's first meeting of the Health and Social Care Select Committee at London Borough of Hillingdon. This meeting is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. The purpose of this committee is to monitor services provided by external organisations within its remit, such as our local health partners, and also to monitor the internal council activity in the social care and health space. So it's a really big remit, very interesting remit, but a very, very big remit. We also take in-depth reviews and witness sessions on specific topics and submit our findings to the decision-making cabinet. My name is Councillor Nick Denys and I'm chairman of this committee. Before we start, I'd like to mention some important housekeeping. Please can you ensure that your mobile phones are on silent. We're not expecting a fire, so if their fire alarm does go off, please follow Nikki out of the building. Even if she jumps out the window, Nikki knows. So. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking and then unmute to speak. Obviously within the room we can all hear each other, but for those who are watching on YouTube and future recordings, they can only hear if we have the mic on, so it's important. As chairman, I will call people to speak during the meeting, so if you could speak through me, that would be really great. Obviously put your hand up if you want to speak and I'll note that down. So, okay, I think that's everything. Brilliant, excellent. Okay, we move on to our first agenda item, which is apologies for absence.
Chairman, we've had apologies from Councillor Bassett and Councillor Punjas here as her substitute, and from Councillor Cawthorne, and Councillor Gohill is here as his substitute.
Thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest in the matters before this meeting? No? Fantastic. Are we okay with the minutes from 12th of May? Agreed, fantastic. So tonight we have 9 agenda items which are in public and 1 which is agenda item 10 in private. Correct? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we're going to start off with our first agenda item, which is agenda item number 5, which essentially is Mark Braddock from who's the Senior Democratic Services Manager, telling us about what we can and can't do as a committee. Go for it, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman, and it's great to see you councillors, and particularly those that are newly elected. I don't know whether this is the second or third presentation for some of you, but it would also be the first for many of you as well. Part of my role, as well as supporting you and the council's governance processes, is to be statutory scrutiny officer, and what that means, I'm here to promote the role of overview and scrutiny in Hillingdon, support you, and I discharge that effectively through my team, Nikki here, and also guide you. I've got a presentation today which I'll take you through. I'm going to take the report on the agenda as read, that you've all read that. I'm going to highlight some of the key features of overview and scrutiny. Again, it is really aimed at some of the new councillors, but it will hopefully be a refresher for councillors that were retained after the elections, and also possibly for some of the officers and other partners here today to get a broader understanding of what overview and scrutiny is about. I'll also be explaining the role of this select committee. Happy to take questions at the end. From the start, though, what I'd like to stress is that overview and scrutiny in Hillingdon is interesting and can be greatly satisfying. And as ward councillors, you can add real value through your own local knowledge and insight from your day-to-day contact with your residents. You can also, through this meeting, make a real difference to the council's decision and policy making processes. Such committees have helped shape many council services over the years, both big and small changes, but some have also made recommendations nationally which had an impact. I recall, just as a small but important example of a review a similar committee to this did back 10 years ago now, in 2012, a committee investigated the special grant that the council provides to children in the council's care when they leave that care and they then transition to independent lives. The committee heard from witnesses, took evidence from local authorities, and importantly, the care leavers themselves, and on issues around the cost of living, the transitioning to their independent lives. That led the committee recommending an increase in that grant by at least 50% to the cabinet, amongst other findings. Cabinet agreed that. It was then included in next year's budget, and that was implemented. So that's a small but meaningful example of a finding that this committee, select committees have developed, which has made the difference to the lives of probably quite a lot of young people in Hillingdon. So just one example. I'm going to take you through today the role and the purpose of overview and scrutiny, how select committees work, the scrutiny call-in process, which is calling in Cabinet or Cabinet member decisions just after they've been made, in exceptional circumstances, I should say, and effective policy reviews. I'm going to leave that item, and again, all of this is in your presentation in front. I'm going to leave that for the July meeting, because we're going to focus more on that in a report to the July round of meetings. And then scrutiny essentials, some do's and don'ts. Just a bit of context to the way Hillingdon Council is governed. You've got the full council, or 53 of you in the middle there, which where you meet. You met only a few weeks ago for the mayor making, an AGM. You've got the executive of the council, the leader in the cabinet at the top in blue, who make the day-to-day strategic decisions. And you've got the sort of quasi-judicial regulatory committees down the side, like licensing and planning. And then at the bottom, you've got our partnership bodies, Health and Wellbeing Board. But then on the right, in red, apologies if anyone's colourblind, you've got the very important arm of the council, which is the overview and scrutiny function, which I will outline further today. This is really basic, and I include this slide in presentations to new staff at the council, just so they can get a context of how local government operates at a governance level. So you have Her Majesty there on the right, nationally, as our sovereign. You have our mayor, Councillor Becky Hagger, who is the borough's first citizen and Queen's representative. Nationally, you have Parliament, that's the House of Commons there, and locally, you have the full council when it meets. Nationally, you have the government, and there's the cabinet with the Prime Minister. Locally, if it clicks, you have Hillingdon's cabinet with the leader of the council. And then nationally, you have select committees in Parliament which undertake reviews, scrutinise the work of the government, write reports to government to make changes, and we have exactly the same here through these select committees in Hillingdon. And supporting all that, you've got the civil service there, and you've got local government officers supporting the council. And they do work in better conditions than that. That's a very old photo, so apologies for that. What's the role of overview and scrutiny? The law. Well, there's some things set out in law that we have to do. These committees are required in law to assist with the development of council policy, to question and evaluate the actions of the cabinet before and after they make decisions, and have the power to make reports and recommendations on those matters. A committee, and it's this committee, must scrutinise and hold health providers to account. Another committee, not this committee, will be taking the crime and disorder role to scrutinise community safety or the Safer Hillingdon partnership activities. That's the structure of overview and scrutiny, which you've all seen. Very neatly aligned are the committees, the 5 select committees, with the cabinet portfolios. So it's very accountable in terms of knowing who's responsible for what. And not shown on there are the council services that are also very neatly aligned. So there's really, really good accountability in terms of our 2 key functions, the executive of the council and then the overview and scrutiny function of the council. Key roles for councillors on this committee. You're here to challenge, scrutinise and monitor services and local issues. Act as the statutory check and balance on the cabinet. You're here to be constructive and at times a critical friend to the cabinet when required. Key thing, and you do this with your policy reviews and sessions like today, propose and drive improvement in local services. And use, importantly, your local knowledge as ward councillors to add value and amplify the voice of residents. And you'd have got a lot of that, you get that day to day, but you'll have a lot of that when you're campaigning on the doorstep, some of the issues that residents raise with you. You'll want to, where they're relevant to this committee, bring those concerns and amplify their voice. There are powers that you have as a committee. You have the power to call in cabinet decisions, which I'll come on to later. You have that power to send reports, which I mentioned. You also have a power to compel council officers, senior officers and cabinet members to this committee. It's rarely, if ever, used because people attend willingly. You have the power to request information, certain information, and in the case of this committee, you do have powers in certain circumstances for substantial NHS processes to refer matters to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. But you don't have any decision-making powers, unfortunately. You can only make recommendations to Cabinet and other partner bodies accordingly. There are three main roles of this committee. Before 2021, these three roles, scrutiny, policy review and overview, were split between different committees, and Councillor Denys may recall attending what was called the Executive Scrutiny Committee at the time, which undertook the Council's just scrutiny role. But we've changed all that. Last year, well actually this year really now, well actually I suppose it was last year, we combined all those three roles, so each committee undertakes all of those roles. Each select committee does all three. The remit of this committee, so it's really important when undertaking your activities, councillors, to keep within your remit as far as possible. I don't think it will be a problem with this committee. You've got a very broad remit with services that link well together, so it's unlikely you'll be, if you like, trespassing on another committee's sort of turf. But going through your remit briefly, you all know your cabinet member, the executive member that you're responsible for, if you like, reviewing her services and holding to account is Councillor Palmer. These are your service areas. Things may change when departments change their names over time, but essentially you've got adult social work, adult safeguarding, a lot of work under Sandra Taylor there, who's the director, public health, and you've got that voluntary aspect there as well. You also have the cross-cutting brief of domestic abuse. But then you have your statutory health scrutiny, and I will defer, later this year to Nikki. She is your expert on health scrutiny, scrutiny of local health services, third-party providers. You work closely with the Health and Wellbeing Board and Local Health Watch, respond to relevant NHS consultations, and there's also joint health scrutiny, which this committee, but through the chairman, will undertake in terms of the North West London Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. That's where this council signed up with other local authorities to discuss, if you like, more pan-London or pan-regional regional health matters. And there are certain legal powers to provide information and attend meetings from our health partners, which I'm sure Nikki will go into more detail nearer the time. And there's a duty of such partners to attend when required. But I think, looking at your terms of reference, all that internal and external functions, for the first time, this committee, I really think, can undertake the full overview and scrutiny role in relation to all local health and social care services, irrespective of who runs them. I think that's a first, actually, for any overview and scrutiny committee. So you can be really creative. You can have a comprehensive outtake on policy reviews within your internal and external mandate, and you can report your findings to Cabinet and then any other body that needs to have it thereafter. There's going to be a lot of synergies, better ways of working that you can look at across the council and with health and social care partners, and contracts is potentially one area. So, you can really aim high for the big issues across health and social care on this committee. How you do all your work is through a multi-year work programme. It's on the end of your agenda at the back. It's a draft. It sets out your workload. Try and keep it manageable. That's my only advice, Chairman and committee members. It spans across multiple municipal years. So it will last for 4 years until the next elections, if you like. It gives you that flexibility. If you don't have to rush to get things to Cabinet in April next year before the new municipal year starts. If you're undertaking a review, you need to have some more witness sessions or need more information, you can adjust your work programme accordingly. There's no deadline for you. It's as flexible as you want to be. It's evolved by yourselves, owned by yourselves, and steered by the chairman. Important document. So going through those three roles, remember those three roles, scrutiny, policy review, and I forget the last one, overview. Scrutiny role, you've got 4 aspects of this. You've got the pre-decision scrutiny. This is where you monitor the Cabinet for a plan. That's a document that sets out what decisions over the coming year the Cabinet's going to make. And you're able to give official comments where you've considered the matter to Cabinet. And you've got a perfect example tonight on the carers strategy, which is on the agenda. You'll give some comments, or you might want to decide them after the meeting. But whatever way you decide, as a committee, you can have those sent to the Cabinet, and we'll include that in the Cabinet report going to the July Cabinet meeting. And Cabinet will consider your comments alongside the rest of the matter. Post-decision scrutiny. We haven't done much of this in Hillingdon, but this is where, let's say, for example, a year ago, Cabinet agreed a new social care policy of some kind, and you decided as a committee, well, we'd like to go and see how that is implemented. How is that being done? Is that being done well or not so well? And you can say, well, let's look at that Cabinet decision. Number 3, scrutiny call-in. This is where you can call in a Cabinet or Cabinet member decision just after it's made, and I'll just go through that a bit later when I show you this app that we use to do it. And then finally, scrutiny of external partners, which I've touched on before. So they're your scrutiny roles. Then you have your policy review role. There's 4 aspects to this. You have your committee-owned policy reviews. These are the really big reviews where you get to the meat of the issues that you might want to undertake. They could be single meeting reviews. They could be very long-term reviews over a number of months, depending on the topic and the issue you want to look at. Past policy reviews. This is where you might have a committee, as a committee or a previous select committee might have done a review into a topic and you want to just revisit and see how those implementations have, so that those recommendations have been implemented by not only the council but by partners. You've also got the opportunity to shape policy. So at some point, and we have this quite often now, Cabinet members may want to bring forward an updated or revised policy on a matter to the Cabinet for approval. And if the Cabinet member is agreeable, you're able to review that policy or comment on that before it comes up for decision. And then finally, we have our policy framework documents. They're the really big plans in the council that go to the full council, and they are required in law to come via select committees first for comments. And we've got an example of that on the July agenda, which is the council strategy, and that's the council's new emerging 4-year plan, which will be coming via all the select committees for your input before it's finally decided. And then your final role, overview. Put simply, this is monitoring services, performance of services, how they work, and looking at performance indicators. We are looking later in the year to moving towards quarterly performance reports for select committees, arising from a previous review. But you might also want to look at topical matters that arise. Something could happen out in the community that you might want to discuss at this meeting. Again, you add that to your work programme if you agree. And then you get to monitor the council's budget twice a year and also comment on the annual budget plans. Right, this call-in I've been sort of not talking too much about and saying I'll speak on it later. This is where you can call in a Cabinet or Cabinet member decisions just after it's made. Cabinet and Cabinet members make hundreds of decisions annually, and you all get notice of them from Democratic Services whenever a decision's made. And this procedure allows councillors on the relevant select committee that's identified in the decision notice to intervene, if you like, where you feel that decision needs to be revisited or possibly changed. And I can't give you a sort of guidance on exactly why you might want to call things in. Sometimes, occasionally, it can be political. It could be that you don't agree with the policy. It's not the sort of policy that you as an individual or as a group might want to consider, political group might want to consider. But it needs to be used exceptionally, and that's all I would say. The guidance does say when you do consider calling in a Cabinet or Cabinet member decision, for whatever reason, it needs to be done exceptionally. And to do that, we have an online app. Now, when you get that decision notice from Democratic Services, so Cabinet member, Councillor Palmer, Jane Palmer, she's made a decision on a new sort of carers action plan or something like that. I'm just saying. And very unlikely, but one of you here doesn't think it's quite hits the mark or needs to be changed or perhaps adapted in some way, then on that decision notice, you'll see the decision that's been made, and it will say you can call this in by X date. So you've got 5 working days to call that in, basically, using this app. So let's pretend Councillor X on this committee doesn't like that decision for whatever reason. You can go onto this app, and I'll be sending out details tomorrow how to use it. You go onto the app. There's a link on the decision notice to go straight to it on your laptops. You just fill in a very simple form with the detail, your name, your committee, why you're calling it in. You can attach documents to it. And then press submit. Automatically, all of you in this committee, because it would have been a councillor from this committee, will get an email saying Councillor X has called this decision in for these reasons. And you can say, okay, well, I'll click on the link to find out more about this. You can ignore the email if you want to, but you might want to go and find out more on why the councillors decided to call this decision in. And you'll see your names pre-populated on the side. They're officer names because this was a test module, but your names will be populated and you can decide whether to approve or reject that call-in request that councillor made. And you can also add your comments. And then you press submit. And over time, there'll be a running total. These are quite a few draft test call-ins, but if we just take the top line, for example, I've just put a social care contract call-in as an example. We've got 1 councillor for, 1 councillor against. Now, you need the magic number of 4 if you're able to actually formally call anything in. That is a majority of this committee. So if four of you on this committee say, yes, actually, we all support that request, then we get immediately alerted in democratic services. That decision that the cabinet member has made is completely put on hold. The officers are told they cannot implement it, and then a special meeting of this committee is convened to reconsider consider that decision. You can call in the cabinet member, ask them to explain why, call in the officers, why is this not being done this way, or whatever the issue was, and then depending on your discussions with those people, you can decide whether you want to carry on and you believe it's not right and refer it back to cabinet or the cabinet member to make again, or you can say, well, actually, we've heard from the cabinet member and we sort of understand the rationale now and we actually agree, and that's fine. And then the decision is released and can be implemented. So you cannot stop a cabinet or cabinet member decision from ever being made, but you can delay its implementation for valid reasons or for exceptional reasons in a transparent public forum where you can debate those issues, basically. So you can't automatically stop it, but you can allow for that real scrutiny of that decision. That's the call-in process. I'm going to skip over this, and Chairman, last 2 slides from me. Top tips, some scrutiny essentials. So the importance of your clerk, Nikki O'Halloran here. Nikki is Democratic Services Manager, and she is your go-to person, really. Absolutely important person to support this committee. Nikki clearly doesn't just do the minutes. Like I say, an awful lot of work goes on behind the scenes. The research, the communications, the relationship building, and all that no doubt a lot of you've experienced over the years. So an absolutely great asset to the council. Nikki's an expert in health scrutiny, so I know you'll really enjoy working with Nikki. So just to flag that up at the start. Rules and guidance. Well, how you work, you have to have some rule books, and they are in the Constitution, and that's Chapter 6 in the Constitution. That's your rule book. It's also in your agenda pack. That's all the rules and overview and scrutiny. There's also a section at the end, a protocol, about how you and the cabinet work, or should work together. It's guidance, really. It's about working in a constructive manner. The last thing you really want to do as a committee is come up with some findings from your policy review and say, and not have engaged the cabinet member in it at all, not even briefed or informed or talked about it and discussed it, and it's going to cost £10 million. The council hasn't got any money for it. It comes to cabinet and cabinet rejects it. So it's really important to have that constructive relationship. You are independent, but that constructive relationship is really, really important. One of the questions I get asked regularly is about access to information. And I would just suggest if you've got any issues, come to me or Nikki on a case-by-case basis on that, because it really is a case-by-case basis. But as a general rule, you have access to all cabinet papers, public clearly, and confidential papers. In Hillingdon, we provide councillors with all confidential cabinet and cabinet member papers. So you don't need to worry about that. You will always have access to those papers that fall within your remit if you request that, and you get copies of it anyway. But you also have access to information, perhaps data and stats, where you're undertaking your scrutiny activities. You're doing some work on the topic, so you have the ability to request that within reason, obviously. And I would suggest, I don't know what the chairman's view on this, it's ultimately his view, requests are made by the committee, so you all know what information you're gathering or you're requesting, and Nikki will go away and she'll report back. And if needed, she'll circulate that around the committee, in between meetings, because it might be more timely, you might need to know. And there's a whole load of other ways to get information as part of your policy reviews, which we'll go into more detail later, but when you're undertaking reviews, it's not just hearing from witnesses. You might need to perhaps consider commissioning a survey or some consultation of some kind, or you might want to have some networking or site visits or whatever. There's a whole raft of tools at your disposal to get that information that you need for your review. When you've got your witnesses attending committee meetings and you want to ask them questions, clearly, I know you all will, you'll do that in a very fair and balanced manner, but you do have that formal compulsion I mentioned, particularly for cabinet members and officers, to require them to attend. I'm going to leave you here with some quick do's and don'ts. Do try to reach a consensus. I think the chairman probably would agree with me. Overview and scrutiny in Hillingdon is rarely political, especially on this committee. It's a very collaborative approach. So, number 2 there, be constructive and work with opposition group members. That happens all the time, really, on this committee. Do challenge things, ask for evidence, and consider questions in advance and be prepared. It's useful when you've got your witness sessions, you know someone from this organisation is going to turn up or whatever. Prepare some questions in advance and think about the sort of things you want to ask them. If you're unsure, just run them past Nikki and she'll tell you whether they hit the mark or not. Some don'ts. Don't have votes. Very rare you have votes. Might be once or twice in the year you might need to vote. Budget comments, I'm thinking, things like that. But I'll leave that with you, Chairman and committee members. Final thing on the don'ts, what I would focus on is the bottom one, individual complaints or concerns. So, as councillors, you get a lot of members' inquiries, you get a lot of contact with residents on a daily basis, and you might, you should not use this clearly as the forum to raise that particular complaint from that individual. But anecdotally, because you want to amplify the voices of your residents, it's fine to use those complaints, that complaint or those complaints generally in an anecdotal way to demonstrate or give evidence, some sort of quantitative evidence, if you like, towards the matter in hand. So I would just bear in mind, these aren't the forums to raise an individual complaint that you've received from a resident, talk about that, but you could use that complaint or complaints generally about that topic if you want to raise issues at the committee. So it's pretty basic stuff. Chairman, that is it from me, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and clearly throughout the year you've got Nikki here to support you and answer questions as well.
Thank you very much, Mark. When I found out I was going to be chairing this committee, the first thing I did on Monday was message Nikki to ask her which committee she'd be helping out on. And then when she said she'd be doing this one, I did a little jig. Because as Mark said, Nikki knows the environment extremely well and a lot of the actors involved. And I describe it not just as my right-hand arm, but the right side of my brain in many of the stuff that we do. So no, we are very lucky to have you, Nikki. Thank you. One thing I'd like to ask first, actually, Nikki, is could you explain a little bit more about our statutory health function, because that is something a bit different to other scrutiny committees.
So when the statutory responsibilities were actually included in legislation, there's a requirement for every large council, so a unitary, a London borough, a county council, to have a health scrutiny committee. Those health scrutiny committees, so effectively this committee acts as the health scrutiny committee. The health scrutiny committee is able to require our health partners to come and attend and provide us with information about how they're performing and about the general work that they're doing, which is unlike most other committees where there is no requirement for anybody to actually attend. But like Mark said, generally with the other committees it will be internal people, and there's kind of a requirement for officers to attend. So it's not the same because ours is set in legislation with the health scrutiny. But yes, it does mean that we are actually able to have partners from the health world come along to our meetings to actually talk to us. I think similarly, I don't know which committee it is it Resident Services for Crime and Disorder? They have a statutory health scrutiny role in relation to crime and disorder. So the police, I think it's CCG, Probation Service, Council and Fire Brigade are all part of the Safer Hillingdon Partnership, and they can be required to actually attend their meetings and provide information as required, same as us with the health. Is that okay?
Thank you. Yeah, brilliant. Just before I take any questions, my initial reflection on this committee is the potential scope and the workload is absolutely humongous. So I think that one of the challenges for us is to be able to focus our energy on things that we want to do and where it can really be where it really matters. Because there's going to be so many important things that come across our desks. So I'll try and keep meetings to under 2 hours, but I can't promise that will happen. And but generally, I think most of the stuff we look at will be really interesting and the type of stuff that residents really care about, which is the compensation for having to spend 3 hours every month together. But obviously, when we come to our work programme, item 9, we'll discuss that in more detail, what we might do and how we might do it. So I've got some ideas, but it'd be really great to hear everybody else's thoughts. I previously was chairing the External Services Scrutiny Committee, which had the external NHS function. I see some faces who've appeared before me before on a regular basis, so I'm very happy. And obviously June was on that committee with me as well. And I think I always felt frustrated, I don't know if June felt frustrated as well, that we'd look at things and it would stop at the door of the council, when the truth is health and how it's delivered is all the actors together and how they all interlink together. So even though we've got an absolutely huge remit, the fact that when we look at something, we can look at everybody and everything and how it all works together, I think is going to be absolutely crucial to us being able to look at these matters. So yeah, so that was my Oscar speech. Just one brief note of detail. My preference, if we're asking for information, is for us to discuss it at a meeting. Ultimately, we're meeting once a month, so hopefully that will be okay. Obviously, there might be occasions where it's urgent, and then we can try and do that online. Because in terms of getting officers and the NHS or NHS colleagues to provide information, there's a balance between information we need and also not wanting to take too much time away from what they're doing in terms of delivering services. But obviously, if we need the information to do our job well, then we're going to ask for the information. So ideally, if we want to make information requests, I'd rather we all discussed it at this meeting. If it's not possible, we can do it over email, but that's just my one point. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Are we happy to move on and do our business? Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Mark. Excellent. Okay. So thank you. So our first agenda item is sort of a carryover from some of the work we were doing in the External Services Committee, and sort of highlights, I suppose, the cross-relationship issues between solving issues that arise. So a number of months ago, we found out that police officers were spending an increasing amount of time having to stay with people who they judged as being not mentally fit to basically just leave. And so ultimately in these situations they had to take them to a place of safety. A lot of times this ended up being accident and emergency, and then staying with the people until firstly they'd been assessed, and secondly until an appropriate place for them to be had been found. Now the witnesses are going to give more details on this, but the amount of time that essentially two officers were having to spend with people was, when I found out about it, mind-blowing, because ultimately if officers have to be in A&E with somebody for, let's say, 6, 8, 12 hours, that is time when they can't be on the streets doing other things. And it was one of these issues where essentially different parts of our sort of public health landscape needed to come together to think about how we could help improve this, because ultimately I think everybody wants this thing to be done quicker so police can get out there and do policing. And obviously, somebody who is in a distressed situation, I can't imagine being in A&E with a couple of policemen around you is a particularly brilliant way of dealing with that situation. So we had a set of meetings with people who are here tonight to sort of talk about the situation and ask what can we do to improve the situation. So how I'd like to approach this, I think, if it's okay, is I'd like the police to go first, just to talk about their experiences and maybe how they see the future compared to 7 months ago when we first talking about it. So who would like to start?
So firstly, thank you for the committee for the invitation. My name is Detective Chief Inspector Hussain. I currently hold the portfolio for mental health alongside 9 other portfolios within the West Area BCU, and I work within public protection, so that's really dealing with domestic abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse, and then all the other matters including mental health. I've got 2 members of my team here, Sergeant Jason Wright, who is actually probably the subject matter expert, and he actually runs my mental health team, and I've got PC Brooke Dunlop here, who is also an operational officer within the mental health team. What I would probably say, Chair, is if we actually go through the presentation, I think it probably makes more sense to do it in that way, and it probably will make, if there are any questions at the end of that, I'm more than happy to answer it in that way, and I think it may all sort of put it all together rather than me being a bit ad hoc and then my colleagues from NHS, CNWL coming in, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I'm very happy about that. By the way, I do like the fact you've discussed this between yourselves and you're working together on the presentation. That bodes very well.
Thank you, Chair. If I begin, I'm Richard Ellis. I'm Joint Borough Director for the NHS Hillingdon team within North West London Clinical Commissioning Group, and short to become Integrated Care Board. We've got a brief presentation. I'll say a few words and then hand over to Detective Inspector Hussain and to CNWL colleagues. I think, as you were saying in your introductory words, Chair, we would like to present this as a partnership issue and a joint collaborative responsibility and opportunity across the statutory services and the health and care organisations. So we have leaders from CNWL, including the Trust Medical Director, and clearly the police across Hillingdon hospitals and Hillingdon Health and Care partners generally. And we're really grateful to the committee for the opportunity to present the progress that we think we have done since the issues were raised in the paper that you have in your pack in February. I think that's a really useful background paper about some of the issues that the police and health services are facing. But I would really encourage and invite members, if there are details or issues within that background paper that you have questions or further comments to raise, I would really welcome that. I think also I'd personally really like to acknowledge the amazing work that the emergency services do for the borough, the police, London Ambulance Service, the emergency department at THH, and the crisis mental health services across the patch. And I think, as the slide in front of you says, we all know anecdotally, and there is data to support this, of the increased demand on mental health services, potentially a 25% increase in requests for adult and young people, bed requests in 21-22 and into this financial year as well. And West Area Basic Command Unit, which of course is larger than Hillingdon and Heathrow Airport, and right across other boroughs in London, and I think the busiest area of London, seeing significant numbers of emergency calls. 1 in 5 of those calls will relate to mental health issues. And clearly, many of those demands and requests and inquiries will be from people with no connection with Hillingdon outside the borough, but who have appeared on the doorstep of West Area BCU. Their use as required of the Emergency Mental Health Act powers, particularly around transporting people to health-based places of safety, has risen by potentially 40% since 2020. And again, some of those figures and the impact on services set out of the background paper. And not only will many of the clients coming to police, coming to the emergency department in the Hillingdon hospitals, coming to CNWL, not only many of those are coming from outside the borough, but also 60% or so will not be previously known to services. I'll pause there, Chair, and pass over, I think, to Inspector Hussain.
Thank you, Richard. So I'll talk very quickly in terms of what this slide actually shows, and I'll sort of give you the overview and then hopefully bring Jason in terms of the actual figures. But we know since the implementation of the mental health team, which was sort of around about March 2018, we had a steady drop in terms of our Section 136 powers. And you'll then see a large rise in 2020. And no doubt you'll probably know why that is, but it's because of COVID. So clearly from 2020 onwards, there was a huge rise in terms of Section 136. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. You could talk about isolationism. You can talk about the movement of services to acute health. You can talk about the socio-economic factors that are changing within the environment, including now the rising cost of living. So there's a number of factors, and unfortunately I can't break down exactly what factors they are. I can only give you sort of an anecdotal summary of what that looks like. But clearly there's been an increase, and then now we've seen a slowly steady drop in the 136, but it's at the same level, or more or less the same level as we started off in 2018 when this data was generated. And you'll see the second point, which I'll bring Vanessa in terms of that, the increasing proportion of Section 136 that go to ED, as there's no HBOS space. So what I'll say in terms of that is just there's, effectively there's 4 pathways. If someone is in a mental health crisis, they are being sectioned under 136. They can either go to the health-based place of safety, that's one pathway. The second pathway is they can go to ED. The third pathway, effectively, is if they're in the community, they can then go to...
Sorry, could you explain what ED is?
Oh, sorry, emergency department. My apologies. And then the other pathway is through the community they could go into either ED or the HBOS. But also they could voluntarily go to emergency department as well. So that's just to give you the different pathways. And we've... and sort of some of the data we've looked at, 30% of Section 136s currently are going into the pathway of using the health-based place of safety, which is the HBOS. 70% are going into ED. Of that 70%, only 14% are going into emergency departments because HBOS is full. The other percentage is because of medical needs or intoxication, and I need to make that very clear so it's clarified. And the other thing you'll see is because the first slide shows about 1,500 to 2,000 calls coming into mental health crisis, not every mental health crisis, the outcome is not always Section 136. In fact, from the data I have in front of me, there's only actually 25% or so of those calls coming in to police around mental health crisis that actually go through the Section 136 pathways. The rest of them actually are resolved in another manner, and again, I don't have that data. I'll just bring in Jason White here, who's a sergeant in the mental health unit, just to speak a little more about that before I bring in my colleagues from CNWL.
Hello everyone. So I run the West Area Mental Health Team, 3 boroughs of which Hillingdon is one. I've got 6 officers working in various roles, and one spends a considerable amount of time looking at current police demand, including identifying individuals in the revolving door of emergency deployments by police, handovers to health, and then a reoccurring emergency service demand. And almost the same month as COVID crisis started, in March 2020, we saw an immediate uptick, and that has continued for about 18 months. That's why we've got the police emergency use of powers rising 40% year on year from 2020 to 2021. And as a result, the overflow, the normal flow into ED has increased quite substantially. Now, that demand last autumn started to tail off back to pro rata volume this year, which is roughly the same as 4 years ago. Now, if that stays the same, we will outperform London as a whole by about 50%.
Sorry, can you define what outperform means?
So in 2018, the Metropolitan Police Service total for Section 136 was, let me check my data, was 4,400 across London. This year it's on track for being 6,600. That's an increase of 50%. Now, we in West Area have been fairly unique in that huge rise between 2020 and 2021. But across London, taken across that 5-year period, you know, our 136s this year are the same as they were 5 years ago. London's are 50% more than they were as a whole. So locally, we've had a very acute blip, if you like, because of coronavirus. But we've worked really hard in the last 3 years to get 136 down, and we're currently working to get 136 down as much as within our control as police officers and working with partners. Just to give you a little bit of history, 2018-19 we were working collaboratively with CNWL to reduce repeat demand. COVID crisis has had a huge impact for factors which really haven't been examined yet. We've introduced a process last year, and we're now bringing the Section 136 down again. So, looking as a whole, I think we are working really well with partners to get a control of 136, notwithstanding Coronas has been a bomb in the middle of it.
Thanks, Jason. And I'll just speak to the last 2 points in there before I bring in Vanessa. Councillor, as you've said, we've sort of tried to work out what actually 136 means to police officers and the time it actually takes. And as you've said, on average, we're looking at sort of 12 hours and 16 minutes when it goes to ED, emergency department. Now, the opportunity cost is obviously, as we manage that risk, we're not managing risks to other Hillingdon residents or West Area residents. And it sort of works out to be about 4,000 police officer hours, which is a lot of periods of time. We haven't worked out the actual cost, but I think it's around about sort of between 80,000 to 120,000 pounds. That's the sort of opportunity cost that we need to look at. That said, we also understand that it's a very complex picture, and we need to work together to understand it better to ensure that we can bring that down, and we are doing so. Let's bring you in now.
Thank you. So I'm Vanessa Odlin. I'm the Managing Director in Central and North West London. And before I move on to the next slide, I think the only thing that I want to highlight from this particular slide is in the right-hand graph around the number of discharges. So that's the total number per month of patients that come in on a Section 136. And I think the key for us as a partnership is actually focusing on the number of people that come in and then are subsequently discharged, because for me those are the people that actually I feel came into a place that was more restrictive than going home. So that's something that we'll talk a bit about in terms of further actions that we can take further on in the presentation, but just wanted to kind of draw your attention to that. So actually I think my police colleagues have already brought out the current challenges. We've seen increased demand, which you've seen in the presentation. There hasn't been any increase in resource either for the police or the NHS in relation to section or patients presenting with on a section 136. However, we have had some capital funding, so it's not revenue, but capital funding in relation to health-based place of safety. So we are in the process of renovating and looking to see if we can create more capacity in our health-based place of safety. We've already touched on the need for increased knowledge and skill sets across partner organisations, and that's something that we want to work together with our partners to do that. And I think something that this piece of work, I think, since the beginning of the year has drawn out is a need for consistent data collection. So are we all collecting the right data? Are we looking at the right data to actually inform the actions that we're taking? So this lists a number of actions we've already taken. I'm going to draw out a few and I'll then hand back to DCI Hussain to talk about the police actions already taken. So whilst we haven't had any investment into people coming in on a section 136, we have had investment in the NHS into mental health crisis alternatives, which links very much to, I believe, this group of patients. We have now a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week single point of access that the police can access, as well as other referrers and people needing support. We have first responder teams who are very much assessing at point of crisis for people who come into A&E or present elsewhere. We've procured 5 step-down beds for Hillingdon residents for people who require that, mainly stepping out of hospital, but people can step up into those beds. And I think most importantly, we've got the Hillingdon Crisis Cafe, so the Coves Cafe, which actually people can self-refer and take themselves into the Cove Crisis Cafe. And we are very aware that we need to work, I think, more collaboratively on making sure we ensure that we do a media campaign and make sure people are very much aware of that within Hillingdon. I think the other things that, Jason, you've already talked about in terms of the really good joint meetings that are happening between CNWL and the police. I've talked about the capital investment, and we're doing some joint working in relation to the Section 140 Mental Health Act policy, which is making sure that there is a emergency bed available or a bed available in the case of an emergency for someone requiring a mental health bed. And I'll hand back to DCI Hussain.
Thank you, Vanessa. So since 2018, when the team effectively went live, the mental health team, we've been working with CNWL in terms of looking at sort of the organisational learning, and we've been collating data. And again, I'll bring in Jason White, who's actually been sort of heading this forward to just explain why we've been doing that, how that works within the Section 140 policy, and what we've been then looking at in terms of the lessons learned about reducing risk moving forward. So Jason, if I can bring you in.
Thank you. Yes, so another part of Section 140 of the Mental Health Act 1983 is for local partners to have a process which is reflective and which seeks to improve care. And we've had an internal policing process which I initiated 4 years ago. We at the moment bring that to our quarterly meetings for with CNWL and partners, or as needed on a more regular basis. And well, I'm keen to engage with CNWL and set up, I think Vanessa's setting up the Crisis Care Concord Act group, which is a key part of the Section 140 policy, where our data, our issues can be collected with other partners, reflection. I'll move on to the next item, which is our risk management process. So in 2018 and 19, there was a NHS initiative called Serenity Integrated Mentoring. I'm not sure if anyone's heard about that, but that ceased at the start of 2021 in London and in most places across the NHS in England and Wales. Our team here immediately, in fact before that ended at Hillingdon, we looked at College of Policing guidance and created a more holistic reaction to risk. So we look at what has gone before in terms of patient presentations to emergency services police. We look at anything referred in to us, and we assess it, and we take proportionate management intervention with partners, because we need partner help. That process has been running about 18 months now, and we've had about 800 incidents fed into that, many patients, and I think that is partly responsible for the reduction in Section 136 we have seen recently. But our focus is on best patient care, and as a result, demand is secondary. Reducing demand is secondary. I'm happy to talk about that later if need be. I'll hand back to you, sir.
Okay, so finally, most importantly, what are we going to do next about this? We've talked about the Crisis Care Concordat meeting. So the Crisis Care Concordat meeting is a mechanism by which partners come together and develop a joint action plan to support people in crisis. And obviously, the people coming through on a Section 136 is part of that, but there's a whole other range of things we need to discuss in terms of crisis care. There is a Crisis Care Concordat meeting held at a North West London level, but we are setting up one locally so that we can have a local action plan that's delivered or developed and delivered by partners, and that would create a mechanism so that we can support and monitor our actions as well that we're taking. The crisis, we're going to have a Hillingdon Crisis House opening in August 2022. Again, that will be a mechanism by which we can safely support people who are in crisis. So that can be, we will jointly work with the police and with A&E to make sure people are in the most appropriate and safe place. So we'll be able to use that as an extra resource. I think finally want to talk about setting up a task and finish group around looking at whether street triage might be something we want to implement, particularly in Hillingdon. And I think really off the back of the work that Jason's described in terms of the mental health team that's been developed in the Met, and particularly in West area, from my perspective, we need to think about what can we do from Central and North West London, from our mental health practitioners, what can we do to support the police? So a street triage model is broadly having a mental health practitioner going out with the police. So if someone is in crisis, actually, as you say, rather than 3 police officers turning up and someone's in crisis, and actually that reaction may not be a good one or helpful for that person in crisis, actually having a mental health clinician there to support the police officers, to support that person, and to try and make sure that they're in the least restrictive environment, that may actually help. So that's something we're going to do, and I know, Sarge, you've done quite a lot of research in terms of this, so I shall just hand back to you to kind of finally talk about that.
Thank you, Vanessa. So the third option you see there is or shall I say, the last option you see on that action to be taken is about street triage. Now, there's been a number of studies since 2016 nationally around street triage. One of the studies that has been evaluated by the College of Policing in 2019, and that's where those 3 options have come out of that evaluation study. Now, there are, shall I say, indifferent results, but because they cover a large sort of area, it's difficult to say whether it's been effective or not. I do think it can be very effective in West area. That's my personal opinion, but it is coming at a cost. So I can say that very clearly, and I know nobody likes to dip their hands in their pockets sometimes, but the cost you're looking at is between sort of 250,000 to 400,000 pounds for a street triage pilot. Obviously, we would work towards what that looks like in Hillingdon. I'm not suggesting that that's how much it would cost, but it's an effective way of moving forward in terms of the crisis. And the last thing I'll say is, we know, and I sit on a number of different sub-forums and partnership groups, that there is an increase of DA referrals and mental health referrals, and I know there's a cross-cutting feature there. So that's just to sort of be aware of, that this problem is not to go away. This problem is going to more than likely get worse, just based on the socioeconomic factors I spoke about earlier. And it's just something to think about how we move forward. We are very much supported by Vanessa and her team, and we'd like to take some of these options forward to help with the mental crisis situation in Hillingdon.
And very finally, hot off the press, actually, we have had an opportunity, excuse me, to put some bids into NHS England for winter funds, and so we therefore have put in street triage monies for that, to the value that you've suggested, Saj. So fingers crossed, we either get all of that money or some of that money to put towards a pilot that we've developed. And I guess what I would say is, had we not been having these joint discussions, actually that's something that we wouldn't have been able to do, and that's for me a kind of real tangible opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Can I bring in Tina Benson and Kirsty Farrell just to explain why you're sat here and what your part of the story is? You're not here because you're just interested. You are actually a part of the story, and just maybe speak about your experience of this issue.
Pressing the wrong button. So I'm Tina Benson, Chief Operating Officer at Hillingdon Hospital. So I'll just do a brief introduction of the kind of strategic impact, and then I'll let Kirsty kind of do the real life on the shop floor impact. So I suppose for us, any of you who know Hillingdon Hospital, obviously we're hoping for a redevelopment, and you will all be very well briefed on that. But the current department is fragmented, it's small, it's difficult to manage because there are a number of discrete areas. We only have one room that is really suitable for managing mental health patients or mental health patients in severe crisis, because there are ways in which those rooms need to be built with 2 exits, etc., for the safety of individuals and the staff caring for them. It is in the corner of what we call Blue Zone, and with greatest respect to our police colleagues, when we have a mental health patient and 2 or 3 sometimes police officers with that individual, quite frankly they're in the way, because it is a very small department, and actually with the increases described by our colleagues, we have had days where we've had 10 of those patients in our department, which in total is about 28 cubicles, so that's nearly half of all of our cubicles taken over with mental health patients, because of that rise in demand. Now, they won't all be on 136s, they won't all be accompanied by police officers, absolutely. But actually, in my view, and I'll let Kirsty say a bit more, is the worst possible place you can be if you're in crisis and you do not have any clinical needs. So we absolutely need to look after people in a holistic way. It is actually the worst place that you could possibly be. It's busy. People are going in and out, people are arriving and leaving at all hours 24/7, and it has a real impact on how we can care for the other patients, because of the amount of space and resource that these individuals require from us in ED. We are really keen, though, to make sure that all of their holistic needs are met, and we have had cases where patients have presented with what staff have thought are mental health issues, which actually have turned out to be physical issues. So we've got to be really cautious about which patients we take where, because we have to see them in a very holistic way, and particularly our vulnerable children and young people. We haven't really spoken a lot about those in this presentation because they don't often fall foul of 136 sections, but actually those people are equally vulnerable, and we need to look at that quite holistically across the whole client group, because often there are complex social needs for these individuals as well as mental health or physical health needs. But I'll hand over to Kirsty. I've probably talked too much, Kirsty. You can't think of anything to say, but
I've always got something to say. So thank you. My name's Kirsty Farrell. I'm the Clinical Services Manager for the Emergency Department at Hillingdon Hospital. Just a background, I am a nurse as well, so I've worked in the department for a number of years. We are seeing an increase in mental health across the board anyway. So it's not just necessarily patients that my colleagues have alluded to that are on a 136. We have patients that self-present or may come in with the ambulance service because they may have taken an overdose or they may be in a mental health crisis, but they're compliant at the time and they'll come in by ambulance. So, as Tina said, the department is extremely busy but extremely small as well. So imagine you as a patient coming in and you've got bright lights, lots of noise, lots of people around, the lights never go off, the noise never goes down, you're in a crisis and you just want somewhere calm to go and relax. An ED is not that place. The staff work extremely hard and they work very, very closely with the police and they work extremely well with CNWL colleagues. So we have access to psychiatric liaison nurses who are specialist practitioners in mental health 24/7 and they are extremely responsive to the needs of those patients. I think what is challenging is as Tina rightly pointed out, we quite often will have double figures of mental health patients in the department, and quite often when one patient becomes agitated because of the environment, it has that ripple effect. And that makes it really challenging for the staff to be able to manage that situation and also to be able to provide those patients with the care that they need because of the environment that we're in. Our staff work really hard to address, because most of these patients will have a physical health need, whether that be an underlying condition that they may already have in their pre-existing life, to manage both their physical and their mental health needs. But I think everybody's working really hard for the same goal, to give these patients the best experience that we possibly can. And I think that's pretty much, I've spoken too much as well. So thank you.
You haven't spoken too much. I've been in many meetings and you definitely haven't spoken too much. But no, that was a really interesting picture. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then I'm going to open up to the rest of my colleagues on the committee. My first question actually is to you, Tina, and Kirsty. So you're going to have a chance to speak again. Obviously we know about the hospital rebuild, which is working its way forward and we're very hopeful about it happening. Is the new A&E department going to be better in terms of being able to handle the situation you described?
Yes. So I mean, in simple terms, where we are very fragmented at the moment, which makes managing all patients quite challenging. But in the new redevelopment, actually we have a single emergency floor. We're working with CNWL colleagues when we get to the next stage of drawings, which will be the one called 1 to 50, so the smaller drawings. We will be working out how we create the right environment in our ED department for when we have people with mental health needs, so that we have better facilities than we have now. A simple example is we have all our rooms at the moment are ligature light, so we don't have ligature-free rooms, and that's something we're going to have to address between now actually in the redevelopment, but certainly in the redevelopment those are the sorts of things that absolutely will be part of the new building standards that we don't have now.
So that's positive, and the fact you're talking to each other about this is very, very good. The next question I have is probably directed at Vanessa. So you mentioned about investment into mental health crisis alternatives, which obviously is a great thing. For example, the Cove Crisis Cafe. But how does that link in to sort of stopping or minimising what we've been discussing this evening? Because ultimately, on both sides, the amount of police time that's spent within, especially A&E, is just not conducive to having as best local policing as possible. But yes, also at the same time, which Tina and Kirsty, brought out very, very well, for those who are in that situation, an A&E department. I mean, if I'm in an A&E department, it is, not a relaxing or place to be. It's not, and we want, we want to improve the situation for the people who are in there as well. So, I mean, is there any sort of crossover between that sort of work and limiting, not taking people to A&E or improving their experience once they get to A&E?
So I guess I would start by saying the money that we've had through for crisis alternatives is always has particular criteria set to it. So whilst we might have wanted to spend it on something relating to people on Section 136, we haven't been able to. So actually, what we've done is tried to create as much extra resource and capacity for people who are in crisis, who can either take themselves to the Coves Cafe to be referred to the Coves Cafe, as well as the other crisis alternatives we've talked about. And I know that we're talking with the police about whether we could do something more creative before someone is on a 136 with the Coves Cafe. Someone wouldn't necessarily be able to go there on a Section 136, but the hope is obviously that we use preventative measures before it gets to the point of someone being taken somewhere on a Section 136. So whilst yes, we've put these up in terms of actions already taken because they are very much the preventative measures, we now have got to the point where we need to consider something like street triage that actually really gets to the kind of nub of the issue when people are already presenting in crisis.
And just to add to that, obviously the concept we're taking is prevention is better than the cure here. If we do have that model where we have dedicated vehicles going to individuals who are suffering mental health crisis, it may be that we then have we have the clinician able to divert the individual away from the HBOS or ED into one of these alternatives. And that's really how we see this being effective and working. So, and obviously that stops the flow or stems the flow per se into ED or into the health place space of safety. And I think that's what we have to understand. So yes, we need to strengthen those alternatives in order to stem the flow.
So if I may just add one thing. So we haven't brought it up in the meeting, but something that we already have in place is a high intensity user team. So it's a joint working team between the HHCP and Hillingdon Hospital and CNWL. So we have a list of patients that attend our department frequently. We have one of our junior sisters is actually working and leading that team, looking at what it is that we can do to provide intervention in the community for those patients. So there are a number of care workers that work with her, and it may be something simple as at 2 o'clock in the morning that person wakes up and it's routine, and their automatic response is to pick up the phone because they're in crisis and call for the police or an ambulance. So it may be that the care worker puts an intervention in place, so they set their alarm at 10 to 2 in the morning. They ring that person at 2 o'clock and say, "Hello, I know you're awake, is there anything I can do to help you?" We have seen a significant reduction in the number of attendances because of the positive impact of that, and actually it's something that they took to the Health and Safety Journal Awards and were successful in winning that award for the impact it actually had on the patient's care, and they actually used case examples to take that award forward. And we have had a number of patients that would frequently attend 2 or 3 times a day. I haven't seen them for months. So really positive.
I just really wanted to just remind ourselves, though, that the biggest challenge for us in Hillingdon Health and Care Partners in terms of this cohort of patients is 60% of them are not known to us. And that is a challenge we're absolutely grappling with, and that's where we need our LAS and Metropolitan Police colleagues completely alongside us, because otherwise we will never get these people to alternatives, because there isn't anybody to direct them to alternatives. So I just want a reminder, and it is a real challenge. And I just wanted to also just say, so this is not just a challenge for Hillingdon. Obviously, I know that we're looking at Hillingdon, but that we actually had a mental health summit on Tuesday across the whole of North West London, because this problem is being replicated across North West London, and actually some of the power that the Integrated Care Board brings across North West London is potentially a network, a way of doing, for example, street triage that actually doesn't necessarily then cost partners in Hillingdon as much, because we can have a shared resource across a wider area.
Does anybody have any other questions? June.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got quite a few, but I'll go through them one by one. For the police, he said emergency call out is what for the time for the police is 1,500. to 2,500 call-out a year. 1 in 5 is with mental health issues. How do you, as a police, integrate that into the community care with CWL and other agencies that you use? The other one is need for consistent data and collection across the partnership. What is being done to enable this? How are you using that data, and how much of that data has been collated? The other one is for CNWL, the provider. What is being done to secure and to enable mental health patients to have a safe environment for treatment, seeing that the provision for the local health authority is not available? You said you secure 5 beds. So previously, how much beds were there? Because the high amount of mental health requirement by our residents has gone up twofold, or I should say fivefold. What is being provided for that, for NWL and the trust to work with that? Because obviously 5 beds is not enough. So what happened to those mental health patients in crisis? And 2, you talk about the cafe. Is that a 24-hour service, or is it just Monday to Friday or 9 to 5 service that is being provided for people with mental health?
Just take those. Whoever wants to take those questions. I'm looking at Vanessa first, probably, but not necessarily.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. So I'll probably start, and then I'll go on to my colleagues to assist me on this. So when we spoke about the sort of 1,500 to 2,000 calls, in terms of a mental health crisis, like I said, not all of them go into a sort of Section 136 power. Only sort of 475 odd do so. The others can actually go there voluntarily. So the process is that when officers arrive at a mental health crisis, they are to call the SPA, and the SPA is again medical health professionals who are able to advise whether that subject needs to go through the Section 136 pathway or not. So we can get advice at that stage. But like I said, there's about the same proportion of those that are Section 136 that actually go voluntarily to a hospital. And again, I'll go to sort of Jason Wise, who'll probably be able to give you more factors about it. 50% of that demand, we actually don't have a breakdown of what happens with them. We know that they're resolved in another manner, but I don't actually have the data on what that resolution looks like, unfortunately. And I apologise, Councillor, that I'm not able to give you that 50%. I can tell you what happens with the other 50%. Jason, if I ask you to come in.
Yes. So if you take the estimate of 1,500 to 2,000 emergency deployments to people in mental health crisis in Hillingdon, about a fifth of them end in police using Section 136. About a fifth end in police taking somebody somewhere, and it is nearly always the emergency department at the moment. Now, those people ordinarily 3 or 4 years ago would have been taken by the ambulance service, but the ambulance service, I don't think there's anyone here representing them, under huge pressure. When police are present and there's no medical risk, then generally they struggle to deploy towards the end of every shift. The other 60%, I measure some of the outcomes, so sometimes we use the Mental Capacity Act. But for everyone with a mental health vulnerability, which an officer feels is unmet or needs reporting, then they complete a vulnerability report on Merlin. That gets assessed by the multi-agency safeguarding hub in the council, and a significant amount of those then get sent to the local authority and on to healthcare partners. Does that help answer your first question, Councillor? Which parts have I missed?
it does help a bit, but there's still not full clarity on it. So it's just getting the full clarity on it, because obviously there is a massive big divide in between with that. So it's just trying to understand how it works.
Not all emergency calls end in an outcome which we've discussed. The most common outcome for people in crisis is a non-coercive one. Please don't use the power. Please don't use Section 136, and please don't take them. Anyway, I don't actually break down the missing 60%.
Vanessa,
do you want me to answer the second question? Which was how far and what do we use the data for? So we collect data on suicide, those who have completed suicide in the borough. And that's as a result of a Thrive London initiative started a couple of years ago from MOPAC. And that was to provide support for those who were family members, etc., friends who were the victims of other close people committing suicide, those who were bereaved by suicide. That's because data suggested that those people were 9 times more likely to complete suicide themselves. So we look at suicide and those people who might be directly affected. We also look at and classify people from looking at the Merlin reports, which are the police safeguarding reports. We identified our own definition of an attempt at completing suicide, because not all mental health crisis is an actual attempt to take your own life. Some of it is serious self-harm. Some of it is a likelihood of accidental death. Some of it is risk to others. So we look at attempted suicides. We also record those detained under Section 136, those taken voluntarily somewhere, normally to hospital, those where we use the Mental Capacity Act. And on a separate database, we also look at some crimes committed in the community or in mental health units. So from that data, which is collected daily, but we review it every week, we check for reoccurring names, and we often find a lot of reoccurring names. 20% of the names on there are stuck in the cycle of, like I said earlier, emergency services deployment, some sort of professional NHS involvement, coming back to an emergency services deployment the next day, later on that day, or months or weeks later. What we do when we identify those names is risk assess each one. I've got 3 officers across 3 boroughs dedicated to risk assessing and considering intervention by the police. Now, we don't want to get involved in anything which doesn't touch a police service deployment. Why would we? But we want to keep an eye on the future, and these names just keep spinning around. So we risk assess it. High risks, we take immediate action and look at introducing protective factors and withdrawing risk factors. And we can't do that alone. We often link in with our NHS colleagues, and we work, Victoria Hull, who works for Hillingdon as my officer, has a fantastic relationship with the Hillingdon frequent attenders meeting. So we have a very difficult, not very difficult, but we have a balance to be taken, which is how much do we intervene and talk to people without their consent, with health partners, to keep them safe. So we balance Article 2 of the Human Rights Act, which is the necessity of the state to save life and to protect people who may be vulnerable themselves, and we have to balance that with Article 8, which is your right to privacy and not to have me look at your medical, or not to ask about your medical records, not to look at your criminal history, not to look at all your deployments. So we weigh up the Article 2 and Article 8 balance. If there's a serious risk to life, according to our definition, then we go away straight away and try and manage that in a day. If we can't manage it in a day, then we complete a report and we look at some quite intensive auditing until we can push the risk down. As soon as we've pushed the risk down, managed the risk, then we look at putting information onto our systems so that the next time that person presents to an emergency service, to the police, we're in a better position to know about their history. And we make plans. We check care is being provided according to guidance from our NHS colleagues. We try and get some sort of guidance and advice from them as to what happens next. So if, for instance, someone is presenting as having a mental health disorder, but it's originating from alcoholism and being drunk, if guidance from our NHS colleagues is please stop considering them as having a mental disorder, treat them as being drunk and alcoholic, then we can have a different response. Then we might use a different power as opposed to using Section 136 of the Mental Health Act. It's all about using that data to look back, to plan forward in a proportionate way to try and stop that cycle of people constantly coming to police notice for mental health crisis. Does that help answer your question, Councillor?
And I'll just say one last thing before Vanessa comes in. In terms of the data gaps, we're aware of them, and we've had a conversation outside this forum around that. So we are working to understand the journey of an individual who is Section 136 effectively all the way through the process. And we've set up some templates outside this, and in the forums that both Vanessa's team and my team will be having, we'll be looking at that journey, understanding the data, understanding the barriers, the blockages and the challenges, and that will enable us to find further solutions.
Hi, Councillor. So in answer to your question around mental health beds, we're not reducing any mental health beds. So what I didn't say was we still do have mental health beds at both the Riverside unit for adults. So we have 36 acute adult mental health beds there, and we have 17 mental health beds for older people, so people who are over 65, next to the Riverside unit in the Woodland Centre. So absolutely not reducing. Just want to assure you, we're not reducing any beds. What we've done is we've increased our capacity. So we've increased by 5 step-down beds. So the step-down beds are beds that are in the community. So they're not necessarily attached to the Riverside unit. So if people are on a journey ready to go back home, there's a bit more support in the step-down beds. So you can go there maybe in between from going from Riverside back home. So that's an increase in capacity because we felt that there was a particular gap in that particular resource in terms of stepping out of hospital. So we've got those 5 beds have already been up and running for the last 12 months. And what we have opening in August is an additional 5 crisis beds, so a crisis house, and that's for people who are potentially in crisis. So I think probably a lot of the people that we're talking about who've been presenting today, that's an opportunity for those people to a safe space for those people to go to. They may not quite meet the criteria of needing mental health inpatient ward, but they will have support from carers and clinicians within that crisis house. Does that answer? On the cafe? And on the cafe, it isn't open 24/7. It is open Monday to Sunday, and I can't completely confirm the hours, but I can come back to you. I do know that the hours were shifted based on what some of the residents were saying in terms of when they wanted to access the Coves Cafe. And just to say, when someone either is referred or presents themselves at the Coves Crisis Cafe, it doesn't just mean they have that one intervention at that time. They're then offered 3 follow-ups, up to 3 follow-ups. So they can either come back, or they can actually have a telephone call, or they can have an intervention in whichever way suits them to support them through that particular crisis.
Thank you, June. Just Kirsty.
So the cafe's open till 10 p.m. I can't remember the opening time though.
I think it's about 2 p.m. or something like that.
I think so.
I remember that. So I think it's important point to make. Oh yeah, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Fantastic, we got there. But I think an important point to make, and I might be, if I'm wrong on this, Vanessa, please let me know. But the Riverside capacity, for example, isn't exclusive for Hillingdon. If somebody in Harrow or Buckinghamshire and there's an emergency, so the capacity in one sense is good in that sense, but in the other sense, it is not a Hillingdon thing. So the usage of it can depend very much, can't it? Not just on what happens in Hillingdon, but what happens, in the surrounding areas.
So there's two different things that we're talking about. So the health-based place of safety is a space with 2 rooms, which is where the police can use the health-based place of safety if someone's on a section 136, and that space, yes, can be used by other boroughs, by surrounding counties, and that is the same for every health-based place of safety. So that is the particular space that can be used by other people. The 36 inpatient beds that we have at Riverside, which is in the same location as the health-based place of safety, is for Hillingdon residents.
I'm going to go to Hector first, and I'll go to you still afterwards. So Hector, what's your question?
Thank you, Chairman. You'll be glad to know it should be a fairly quick question. Just a quick one that might be able to be answered by CNWL about the Hillingdon Crisis House. I'm pleased to see it's going to open in August. I just wanted to ask a few questions about the similarities between the Crisis House and the Crisis Cafe. Will people be able to self-refer or self-present themselves to the Crisis House? Will it be manned 24/7, or will it be subject to similar hours such as the cafe?
Yeah, no problem. So people won't be able to just present at the Crisis House because there are 5 bedrooms in the Crisis House, and obviously we need to be able to manage that. It is being so it's been run by a provider called Comfort Care, but our home treatment team, who support people in crisis within CNWL in Hillingdon, will be very much the gatekeepers. But we will also be working in partnership with the local authority. We'll also want to work in partnership with the police, because actually we know that people present in various ways, but we want to make sure that we have the right space for people and that it's an appropriate use of the crisis house for people. So hopefully that answers your first question. And the second question is, yes, 24/7. It is staffed 24/7, and we'll be making sure that we have very strong links to both our clinicians within CNWL and partner organisations.
Sital.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say that, to start off saying that from reading the report earlier on to seeing all these actions taken, you've answered so many of my questions that were originally in the report. Thank you very much for that. Something that I just want to kind of put out there is the resources needed, because the street triage, what an innovative and really fantastic option to have. And even with the crisis house. But what about the skills gaps? Have we got the resources to be able to successfully output something like a street triage? If not, how are we going to get those resources in terms of human skilled resources? And that then goes across the board onto all the other things that we want to take place, because if the numbers are rising for mental health, and you predict that they will do, we need to ensure that we've got the capabilities on the other side to manage that, because otherwise we're going to be stretched and we'll have similar problems again.
So in terms of people, so the clinicians that we have and whether they're skilled or not, we would absolutely want to make sure we do have clinicians currently who are skilled in that way. So I think what we would be probably looking at is looking within our existing staff group potentially, whether someone might be interested in working in a street triage model, because actually I think it's probably better to have someone who knows the area and very much is already working with partner organisations, but we would want to make sure that we backfill any post, so that's where the money comes in. And I think that to kind of come to your point in terms of any of the kind of skills gaps and the point we've mentioned in this, one of the things that we've talked about and that we want to take forward is making sure that no matter what organisation you're from, that you have some generic skills. We're not saying everyone needs to be a mental health nurse, but we need to make sure that people have maybe mental health first aid plus, and so that people do feel that they're able to deal with mental health crises, or at least know where to go to or signpost, and have that response as well when people are picking up the phone from the police to our single point of access, or they have a clinician available to talk them through that.
And just to add to that, that's one of the main reasons we're going to start a task and finish group, to understand those gaps in terms of skill set training and what we currently have in terms of resources to match that So there is going to be a task and finish group that will understand all of that matters before obviously we deploy, because there's no point in setting us up to fail. The whole point of the task and finish group is to understand what the proposal is, how we match with that, and how we can move forward with it. So that's the plan moving forward, Councillor.
I think the resources point is a good point, and maybe this is a question for Richard to answer, because is there any potential for extra resources for things we know might make a positive impact, or try things that we suspect will, like the street triage, for example, if the task and finish group find that actually doing X would be really helpful, but we need to get resources? And the second question attached to that is, what's happening over northwest London to do with this? Because ultimately we're discussing it from a Hillingdon perspective, but the borders matter to us as councillors, but they don't matter to people who are having issues, or where they go and all that sort of stuff. So obviously to get a better outcomes in the end, northwest London perspective on how this is being dealt with will also be very useful.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always happy to field questions about additional resources and where they might come from. I mean, I think we've touched on some areas in the evening, haven't we? I mean, Vanessa mentioned the opportunity of bidding against the winter planning funds that NHSE hold, and I think that the point that everybody around the table has made about the increasing surfacing of mental health issues, I mean, as Tina was saying, among children and young people as well as among adults, and I think that there is a real opportunity in this time, hopefully that I can call post-COVID, of saying to NHSE, saying to the integrated care boards, saying to professionals across the organisations that we think there is an innovative approach to managing these new areas. Some of those will be new, will be brand new, and will require brand new resources. And so we just have to fight our corner for Hillingdon first and foremost, and also within northwest London about getting a chance at the new resources. Some of it also is about redirecting existing resources and spending them more effectively. I think that we hopefully are still at a very early stage with the integrated care board. I think the opportunity and the promise of bringing statutory and voluntary sector agencies around the same table with the single pot of resources, the single set of skills that represents is an enormous opportunity. And I think, again, Tina mentioned the Urgent and Emergency Care Summit earlier this week, with clinicians right across the 8 boroughs, right across the mental health trusts and the acute trusts, right across the other organisations. I think there's that pooling of bright ideas, and clearly Westminster has in the past pioneered some of the street and community mental health access, and I think it would be really good for Hillingdon to draw on those examples. And I'm also always keen to look outside northwest London and say, well, what has northeast London learned? What has southeast London learned? What are other boroughs that have maybe cracked it? I think that's probably all that I can say. I mean, what I was reflecting on with Kirsty's information and reminders of the high intensity users is that you're absolutely right. I mean, that is an award-winning service by H4All and all partners across the piece. And whether we've really joined up the opportunities between high intensity in ED and some of the specific mental health crisis, I don't know. And you've made me think about whether that's another area we should be bringing to work. And in the task and finish group, bringing in some service user perspective as well, and getting Mind and maybe Hestia involved with the Crisis Cafe, maybe feeding in some ideas for the street triage work or other opportunities. And I think, and it may be something that Dr. Hopper wants to comment on, but there's clearly community-based crisis intervention services that have been running in mental health for decades, and is now the time to be refocusing and retargeting some of that expertise to be addressing some of the issues that police and emergency services are identifying.
Thank you. As part of being chairman of this committee, I also get to sit on the joint health and overview scrutiny committee for North West London. If you can imagine it, a committee made up of 9 chairmen or chairwomen. It is an interesting experience, but it's expertly chaired by Councillor Shah from Brent. But mental health is definitely going to be one of our priorities over this year, and when it comes up, I'll bring this issue up as well, because we're not an island on this, and while it sounds, a lot of stuff that we're doing sounds good, it'd be interesting to see how this is being tackled across North West London. Okay, I'm about to bring this item to a close. Is everyone happy with that? Oh yes, of course. Rita, go for it. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, just one quick question. I think Sergeant Wright answered one of my questions about keeping a data of people that do come back. But do we know on average how long an individual stays in a Section 136 place like Riverside? And then do they come back again once they've been discharged?
Sorry, do you mean how many do they come back again?
Yes. So once they've been placed in Riverside, what's the average time they would stay there before they're discharged? And then, do you have many that do come back?
So in terms of the kind of statutory powers that that you can give to someone to remain in a health-based place of safety is up to 24 hours. It can be extended by a clinician, so by a medical, so by a doctor. It can be extended but it's really difficult to do that. So that's in terms of the stay in health-based place of safety. I can't tell you off the top of my head, and that's a really good question about people coming back in. It may be that is something that we need to pull together in our joint working group to really kind of have a look at, because that would be something we'd want to have a look at in terms of people that are returning.
I could certainly provide that data, but it would take me a little bit of number crunching. Anecdotally, some people are sectioned several times on the same day. Other people wait several months or several years, in addition to all the other emergency deployments which don't result in a Section 136. So I could probably provide some 2021 data for the next meeting, if that helps.
I mean, that'd be really useful, because obviously if there are people who are coming back again, the ability to be able to maybe intervene earlier with some of the stuff that you're talking about, Vanessa, and the example that Kirsty gave, a really good initiative that's stopping that happening could help a lot. So yeah, if that data, once you've got it ready, if we could have that. Just to conclude this meeting, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This item. Gary was looking a bit worried there for a second. No, you're going to get a chance in a second, Gary. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's attended here and given us a really full presentation of what is an important issue. And for me, it's really, really positive to see where everybody is right now, talking about how they can work together in order to improve things in the future. Because when we first started talking about this 7 months or so ago, it really was a case that everyone knew something needed to be done. But I think the conversations now that are happening together, I think, are really positive. On the flip side of that, of course, we've got positive hopes, but what we want to know as a committee, I'm sure, is what happens. So as long as the committee agree, if in a year's time we can come back and have another update, really, all the stuff we talked about today, and find out how it's worked and what you've learned, if that's okay. If it's possible as well at the about 6 month juncture, if me and June can have a meeting with some of the key players, just so we're updated at the 6 month juncture. And also, would it be possible for me in June to attend one of the crisis care concordat meetings, just to observe to see what's going on? Is that possible? That would be really interesting. So those are my 3 asks. If the rest of the committee are happy with those asks. Yeah, and everybody else is happy. Is that good? Okay, fine.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
we'll be happy with that.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah,
okay, well, I'll close this item then. Thank you. And everybody can leave unless you're really interested in the other items, which I think are very interesting. But if you're not interested in them, that's okay. You can get back to your lives now.
And just thank you all in terms of the committee. It's been a real privilege.
Right, so thank you, Gary and Poppy, for sitting through all of our meetings so far. I hope you found it interesting. So you're here to talk to us about the carers strategy update. Gary, are you going to be leading this presentation? Yeah.
Yes, Chairman. I'll take it, and Poppy, with your permission, may come in as we go through. There's been established practice since 2015 for Cabinet to receive an annual update on the delivery of the carer strategy. The purpose of the carer strategy really being to demonstrate or to set out what the council and partners will do to actually support carers in the borough. Over the last couple of years, what we've sought to do is to actually bring the report or a version of the report to the relevant select committee before going to Cabinet, to give the committee the opportunity to add comments to the Cabinet report. The reports are generally very similar. What we tend to find, the report that is actually going to Cabinet will be shorter, so there won't be case studies included within that. So one of the objectives today really is to seek the committee's agreement to continue that practice. It does actually become slightly more complicated this time round, in that it's important to point out that the carers strategy is one of those cross-cutting strategies, and by cross-cutting I mean it covers all ages, carers of all ages. Given the remit of this particular committee going forward, proposed to with the new strategy or new draft strategy, take it to both this committee and to the Children, Families and Education Select Committee. And then again, if this committee decides that it does actually wish to continue to receive performance reports, then we would send performance reports on an annual basis to both select committees. Before I go on to highlight some of the other aspects of the report, I thought I'd actually point out or provide reassurance to the committee that you should not expect to receive such a long report in future. What I've done with this report is actually sort of there's been an awareness that some of the members of the committee may not necessarily be familiar with the subject, so I've actually gone into more detail than you would expect to receive in future reports, and I hope the committee has actually found that helpful. Also, this is an opportunity for the committee to comment on the structure of the new draft strategy. So the report that you're getting is a bit of a retrospective. It's looking at what we said we would do in 21-22. When I say we, that's the council and other partners, and also what's actually being delivered, as well as looking at what we've actually identified as some of the vision supporting principles and potential outcomes within the new strategy, sort of really seeking views as to whether we're looking at the right things, whether there's anything, or whether there's actually anything missing. So what you've got in the report is not the new strategy. It's actually the structure of the new strategy. The draft strategy will come back at a later stage. as I was suggesting earlier, prior to it going to Cabinet, which I expect to be in Q4. And one of the factors that will determine that is when we actually get the census data, because there are specific questions around.
Gary, can I just interrupt you, Jed? So just to confirm, we're creating a new council carer strategy, and the draft form will come to this committee for our comments before it goes to Cabinet.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Yeah, I just wanted to get that on record.
Yeah. It's not, Chairman. It's not just a council strategy. It's a system strategy. Yeah. It's a joint Hillingdon strategy.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Couple of other points I actually wanted to highlight to the committee, Chairman, is that the main carers offer or carer support offer takes the form of the carer support services contract that the council has with Carers Trust Hillingdon, and Carers Trust Hillingdon leads the Hillingdon Carers Partnership, which comprises of the Alzheimer's Society, Harlington Hospice, and Hillingdon Mind, and this has been in place since 2016. This basically offers a one-stop shop for carers in Hillingdon, and I think it is important to highlight as well one of the key benefits of that. That model, which has actually proved to be a very attractive model for external funders, that has enabled Carers Trust to secure an additional £1.5 million funding since the start of the contract. That funding has actually been used to support carers and develop other carer initiatives in consultation with carers. A couple of key achievements, I think, is important to highlight, that we now actually have all partners around the table. I think I've set out what I mean by partners supporting carers in the report. But we actually have quite senior representatives from all of our health partners, for example. I think and key achievement that we've actually done in collaboration is the development of the Are You a Carer leaflet. If members actually haven't had the opportunity to go into the link in the report, this is the leaflet I'm referring to, and we see this as a key part of our strategy for helping people to identify themselves as carers. The underlying message behind this is go to Carers Trust. So there's about 9 pages which basically says go to Carers Trust, but it does, if you have the opportunity to have a look at it, sort of explain what actually being a carer does, and the help that people could actually get from going to Carers Trust. I'll leave it there, Chairman, and then we're happy to take any comments or questions that your committee may have.
Thank you, Gary. I'm going to make a couple of questions, and I'll bring in other members who are interested. I mean, to be honest, my sort of main focus actually is on the future draft strategy, and this was a very interesting document and a very educational document for me to read, to be honest, and will help us when we come to look at thinking about the next draft strategy. Actually, my first point, I've completely lost it, which is typical of me. But is a minor point. But in paragraph 25 of your report, you say that all new staff starting with Hillingdon Health and Care Partners undergo an hour's inductory training about the role of carers in supporting the health and care system and the importance of identifying them and addressing their needs. I just wondered if that training could be available to these members of this committee, because I personally would find it really interesting. I don't know if it is or if it's practical, but I think I would find it very useful. Yeah. For those of us who are interested, it could be very useful. My first question is, how do you incorporate the carer's voice into all of this? You know, is there a representative group of carers, or how do you get feedback from carers about the strategy? Is it working? Is it fulfilling their needs?
Sorry. There's a range of ways that's done. The Carers Trust and all of the organisations within Hillingdon Carers Partnership have various means of actually engaging with people, with carers. So carers actually using services. They get feedback from those carers. There's also the various cafes and other social groups that they're holding, which enables them to get feedback. There's also 2 carer forum meetings that take place during the year, and you'll see within the delivery plan that one of the things we want to do is look at the carer forum. What we used to do a few years ago, way before the pandemic hit, was we used to have forum meetings in different parts of the borough. So we need to look. One of the things we want to do is actually look at the feasibility of doing that again. That it's not as straightforward as it may actually appear, but that's something that we certainly want to look at. And what we will be doing once with the development of the strategy is actually sort of setting out as in visual form how carers' views actually feed into the development of the strategy, but also feed into setting priorities, which would be through the carer strategy group, and that's set out partly in or to a certain extent in the governance structure, which is Appendix 2 on page 53 of the report. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, it's when we come to discuss the future strategy, I mean, that's going to be very, very important, I think, in our considerations about the future strategy. So, I mean, I don't know if it's possible if we could get a representative or so when we discuss it at our meeting, if it is possible, because also any other, for example, the carers forum meetings, if possible, invites could be open to us as well, or whatever, because obviously when creating these strategies, it's a trap that we can all fall into, which is we know our subject area very well, we all care about our subject area, but making sure the voice of those who are affected is included is going to be quite a big thing for us, I think.
Chairman, a couple of points in response to that. One, I mentioned about the carer strategy group. What we've actually tried to do is actually get carers onto that group. I mean, the point that you've actually made, it's quite easy, I think, to actually forget or lose sight of the actual carer experience. Unfortunately, it's proved quite difficult to do that. We did. I think I mentioned in the report that we managed to identify one person. Unfortunately, that individual experienced a bereavement. The person they were loss of the person they were caring for, and didn't feel that they were actually able to continue. But it's really one of those roles where it really needs somebody who's actually able to stand back a bit and think of their experiences in terms of how it can actually how they apply to the rest of the borough, rather than someone's actually just going to focus on their particular issues. So it's quite difficult, and we are looking further at, in fact, it's something that Carers Trust is actually working on.
Yeah, no, it's difficult but important, so definitely something I want to hear more about, definitely. And my final sort of question before I allow others to speak, as chairman, you've always got to discipline yourself, because it's so easy just to ramble away with all the thoughts in your head, but always try and limit myself to a couple of questions. Nikki's looking slightly sceptical, but it's true. My second one is about how you monitor the contract, especially with the Carers Trust, because obviously we give them a significant fund of money to do an important thing. So how do we make sure that they're doing well, and how do we monitor and assess that contract as it's going forward?
monitoring has to be proportionate. So we seek not to overburden the provider. I think it's a point that was actually raised earlier about having that happy medium between sort of getting the data that tells you what's actually going on without actually detracting from delivery. So we ask Carers Trust to produce a performance report twice a year. But we're also because we work very, very closely with Carers Trust, officers are actually receiving sort of quite regular feedback about how things are going. Going forward, what I haven't mentioned in the report is that the contract is actually due to end the end of August next year. So we are reviewing that. We're reviewing the specifications, although August 2023 sounds a long way off. The tender process is quite protracted. So we are actually discussing with health partners now, about the scope to develop a more integrated service, also taking into consideration what will be new statutory guidance covering hospital discharge, which is due to be introduced later this year.
Being a social worker, I think most importantly for me is what families, carers and young people are telling us. I think that's where we get the richest information in terms of how effective the service is, what is beneficial, what's working, what's not working, what they want more, and you know, especially what our partners are telling us, like the schools, because that's where the feedback is coming from. So I think that in terms of the monitoring is how effective it's been. That's been quite useful.
June, and if anybody else wants to speak, by the way, just put your hand up and I'll note down.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm glad to hear that you're looking and reviewing this, because I've got quite a few questions on here, but I'll still put it forward because you might be able to consider it in its entirety as well. In item 11, 10 and 11, you've got there were 970 young carers and 2,287 adult carers registered. And on the data from the National Care Survey that was undertaken in 2021, it says here that 677 of Hillingdon carers were sent a survey and questionnaire. The results of the survey will be published. What was the return of the questionnaire and how many completed it, so that we can get an overview of what that is and what the return on that is? Should I give you or just one by one?
Yeah, one by one is good actually.
Sorry, Chairman. With your permission, there is a danger that I will actually forget what the questions are if I can, on paragraph 10, there is actually an error in the figure regarding adult carers registered. That should be 4,241. To answer Councillor Nelson's question, the methodology for the National Carers Survey is actually predetermined. We don't have any influence in that. I don't actually know what the figure for returned questionnaires or returned responses is to hand, but I can get that. And what as says in the paragraph, we are actually expecting the results. In fact, the results should be coming in this week. So we know what we now know what Hillingdon's responses are, but we will actually be in a position to compare Hillingdon's results with our neighbours as well, and that will help to give us an indication of where we are. that information, I would suggest, Chairman, rather than actually sending to the committee separately, it will be reflected in the new strategy, so the committee will get that in the future.
Yeah, I think what's important is that we know that before we discuss the new strategy.
Page 41. I'm going to go one by one. It says here the carers are routinely identified by adult social care and assessment needs are processed. But it said, however, is that many carers decline the offer. Do you know why they decline the offer? Is it for financial reasons, or is it because of the impact of whatever benefits they may be getting?
The carers assessment doesn't actually affect the benefits. No, the reasons why carers actually turn down the offer of assessment. There's a range of them. Some that consider that the offer being or the assessed care package for the cared for person actually meets their needs. There is an issue with people still not identifying themselves as carers, although we provide information to show or to direct them to Carers Trust. There are some people that don't like actually having that label. That they feel that it's something they do as part of a relationship responsibility, and that is their choice if that's the option that they choose. And there are others that actually feel that the sort of universal offer services from Carers Trust are sufficient to meet their needs, and they don't need to go for an assessment.
I think, and some families feel that their own support network is sufficient rather than accessing universal services.
What happens if a carers do not meet the national criteria? What is in place for them?
There is still the universal offer available through Carers Trust, so there's still a range of potential services through Carers Trust.
They're all good so far, June. So carry on.
The direct payment, that's item 36, direct payment. Is there provision being made to update the IT system to incorporate this on the system so that the accurate information can be ascertained? Because it says here that the direct payment that is identified by the Carers Act, the proportion of the cost on the council's case management, it says that care for persons that benefit the carers are not included, as it is not possible to apportion the cost on the council IT system. So this is why I asked the question, what provision is there we made to update the IT system to ascertain that information?
That's not actually just in relation to direct payments. It's a broader issue of where a package of care is actually provided to address the ostensibly the needs of the care for person, but the carer benefits from it. It's actually quite difficult to distinguish at what point the cared for person's needs stop being addressed, and the service that's being provided is actually addressing the needs of the cared for. This is not something which is peculiar to Hillingdon. It's a kind of discussion that happens across all local authorities, and actually developing an IT system that would address it would be very, very difficult because of that point about, well, where do you put the line between who's actually getting the most benefit out of that particular service? So that's probably a very inarticulate way of saying that it's actually not something that we're really in a position to address because of that very point.
Just quickly follow on from that. Is there any linkage between the national with local authority on that?
It's an issue which all local authorities face, but it's not necessarily something that can really be addressed, as I say, because it's that point of actually trying to identify who's actually getting most benefit out of the provision of a package of care, and I'm not we could focus a lot of resources on trying to fathom that out, but actually we're not really going to get any benefit out of doing so.
Yeah, quickly. Item 38, responding to demands on emotional support, 45% increase. You got 45% of the review in psychotherapy and peer support groups established. Can you tell us how many psychotherapy recruited to support this increase in the borough?
How many additional psychotherapists? The honest answer is no, but I can go back to colleagues. I mean, what I would say is that there's very close working relationship between Mind and CNWL Mental Health Services, but I will go back and seek clarification on that one.
And just one more. Number 40, improving income for carers. You got 1.052K. Was this for one individual carer or a group of them?
That's for several. That's actually just over £1 million. So that's actually for a number of carers. I can if I will be able to find out the actual number if the committee would like that.
I'll leave it at that. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, can you switch off your mic? Sorry. Sitel.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask, maybe when you are doing the strategy, something that would be interesting for me is that when we're talking about, it's in Action 16, I think, Principle 1, about re-establishing care leads in all GP surgeries, and it was saying that it was deferred because all of this is really good stuff that I know COVID meant that it all kind of got deferred and pushed back, and I would like to see maybe in that strategy that there is an implementation strategy of when those things could come back into play again, because I believe that from what you're saying in here that actually they were quite effective and need to be restored.
Yes, that's really one particular area where COVID has actually had quite a dramatic impact. We'd actually been very, very successful, as it says in the report, in establishing carer champions in all practices. We have unfortunately gone backwards. Actually moving this forward is contained within the delivery plan for this financial year. You will see that the target that's actually included in that, I think it's to increase it by 6, is quite modest but realistic. Primary care is, and I'm sure Rich will confirm, this is under an awful lot of pressure. With a number of competing priorities. So I think the reality is that actually getting back to the position that we had pre-COVID is going to take some time. So for this financial year, we have that modest target of increasing it by 6, but we will be working with the GP Confederation and practices to look at how we improve that during the lifetime of the new strategy.
I mean, of course, how GPs operate has changed quite radically as well since COVID, which is probably something we'll look at some point in the future, because I know it's something that people talk to me about as well. Okay, are we happy to move on? Are we happy including agreeing the recommendations on page 36? Okay, I'm going to close the item. Thank you very much everyone for their contributions, and Gary and Poppy, you're free to leave if you wish to, and Richard, you're free to stay and you're free to leave. I'm very impressed that you've stayed.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to hear the discussion on the carer strategy, but I will leave
Fantastic.
you to it
well,
now.
I think you might be coming to our next meeting as well, so but thank you all that. Or maybe not. No, oh no, it's not. Sorry, let's scrap that. If you weren't listening to me, you made a very good choice at that point. So, we're going to move on to item 8, which is the Cabinet Forward Plan Monthly Monitoring. Does anybody have any comments on this? Okay, so Mike, please, sorry.
Chairman, we've got quite a lot of this remit involved in that, so I look at the dates and the dates on it. So hopefully we'll have a discussion around that before it goes to Cabinet, yes?
Discussion around what exactly?
Any of the items that is under the Cabinet plan that falls under our remit here. And I marked off, we've got care strategy and update, older people's plan update, which fall under health and social care. We've got the London Community Equipment Consortium Contact Award. I've just went through them all and just want to know where we stand in this and how we feed back into that.
I think a very interesting question is what comes to us and what doesn't. I mean, I would suspect some of the stuff, like some of the contracts, probably don't need to come to us, but certainly bigger contracts maybe, and contract tendering and monitoring strategy is something I'm quite interested in anyway. Obviously things like the carer strategy and you know, I would suspect the older people's strategy is something that we would be consulted on. I mean, Nikki, how, in terms of stuff that goes before Cabinet, how is it triaged in terms of the stuff that we will discuss and see and not?
So this is what Mark was talking about earlier, where there is an ability for members of the committee to be able to request further information. So the availability of this information is dependent on how far officers have gotten. So if a report is not ready and so therefore is not going to be available in time to be able to come to the committee, then we're clearly not going to be able to have it. There are some things that are going to be programmed in, like Gary and Poppy coming today and talking to us about the carer strategy update, about the performance. Those kind of things have been programmed in, so can come to us, and Gary does his absolute utmost to make sure that he's got reports ready for us so that we can have an input into them before they go to Cabinet. This isn't always possible. It all depends on the availability of information for the officers to be able to write the reports, as well as the reports being available. So it's kind of done, as Mark mentioned earlier, on an ad hoc basis. So it kind of depends on what we're asking for and when we're asking for it. I'm sorry I can't be any more definitive.
I mean, my view is if there's specific items on here that we think we should see, raise that. So, for example, obviously, in July's 7th of July Cabinet meeting, we've got the carer strategy update, and you know, we got. Actually, I think you're correct. The older people's plan update. The older people's plan is something I think we should be interested in. Is it owned by another committee? Or?
Yeah, I think that comes to us.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, in terms of us getting an input and a view on that, I think would be important.
In terms of what date was that one actually coming?
That's going to be 7th of July, so we won't be able to see it.
No, that's not going to be able to come to this committee before it actually goes to Cabinet. But if that's something that in future members would be interested in having on the agenda, then I can speak to officers to see if in future it would be possible for that to come to us before. Yeah? Okay, I'll speak to officers and see if it's possible to put it onto the agenda for future meetings, so potentially next year.
I think even outside this meeting, if people think there's certain things in the forward plan that should come to us, do email me, you know, as well. And as I know you did about item number 10 during today that we're discussing. I'm not in favour of sticking everything that goes to Cabinet on here, because because I mean, I'm looking at the time, it's already coming up to 10 to 9. It's one of our most difficult tasks is going to be able to prioritise all this important stuff. But yeah, no, open-minded to what people say should be discussed, and the older people's plan is a very good point, definitely. Right. Are we happy to move on from this item? Fantastic. Okay, so we're coming on to the work programme. I'm going to briefly set out my vision for the work programme. I've been thinking about this, and it will be interesting to get people's views on. I think, and obviously in terms of some of the details, I think Nikki's going to be very well placed to answer it. Nikki, if you want to say anything about the work programme, please do. And obviously, as Mark said in his bit at the beginning, this is an evolving document as well, depending on what's arising and what we think is important. But you know, as I said at the beginning, I think this committee has an amazingly large and interesting and important remit. And what I wanted to do for our next two meetings was to have interesting and needed information presented to us, but also maybe have it in a sort of learning way so we can really grasp the sort of size of our remit and also the interlinking, especially between the internal and the external. So what I asked Nikki to do was for July's meeting to bring together as much as possible the internal stuff that we do, like the public health stuff and the social care stuff, and get the leading officers involved to come along, and if they're on holiday then their deputies. And then for the September meeting, and June will know this type of meeting very well, we'll get our external NHS partners to come in, CNWL, NHS Hospital, the CCG and others, and then they will give us their updates. And I think if we have that meeting in July and the other meeting in September, we'll have a really big, clear overview of the two different parts. And of course, then how they all work together is very key. So that's my sort of rough thinking about how we move forward. And then I was thinking, then we've got the October meeting, and actually before I talk about that, I was also thinking it'd be really good to invite the cabinet member to come and talk about their sort of strategy and ways forward, and give us an opportunity to question them. And I was thinking about the March or April meeting for that, just because, you know, we neatly sit under Councillor Palmer's remit, and so I think as a committee it'd be useful for us to talk to her about, you know, where she sees things going and for us to question her. So I was thinking about that as well. But as well as sort of the regular updates that we get on stuff that the council's doing, we have opportunities to do an in-depth report and possibly a single meeting report. And I was wondering if we could, Nikki, when do you think would be a good time to discuss the possibility of what type of reports we should do? Do you think October, or do you think we should do it before then?
We've got down selection for September, but as Mark mentioned earlier, it's a rolling programme. We aren't under any pressure to actually get things done by then, so it might be worth starting to talk about the possible topics after we've finished Actually, no, it's going to be quite a long meeting, isn't it? The September meeting with the health partners is likely to be quite a long meeting when we're getting updates from them, because there are a lot of partners. So I think you're right. Potentially, maybe we shift the top section about a review along a month, so we don't start talking about possible review topics until the October.
I think July's meeting and September's meeting will both be long, intense and interesting, and I think, but then maybe October's meeting, once we've had July and September's, would be a good time to think about that. I mean, I've got two ideas off the top of my head which I'll throw out there, which could change depending on what we learn and events. But something that's been gnawing away at me for ages is CAMS, our Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service. I mean, I've been a counsellor for 8 years now, I think. My memory is busted, but I think it's 8 years. And ever since I've been a counsellor, I've always been told CAMS is not as good as it should be, but it's going to get better. And it doesn't seem to get better. Now, for me, this was something that we thought about in external services, but the trickiness was we could only look at part of it because, you know, of the way committees are structured. But now I've asked Nikki, and it completely comes under our remit. So that's something that's definitely in my mind, but I'm open-minded to other people's ideas. And another thing that's of interest to me, which I think a lot of other people might, which is important, but something that a lot of other people might not be particularly interested in, so do groan, maybe for a single meeting review, is I really want to get to the bottom of how we procure services in this area, how we monitor contracts, and how we know we're getting value for money, because the council spends a lot of money, and it gives a lot of money to external providers like CNWL and whatever, and also gives money to third sector organisations to do these things. Now, I'm completely a fan of that principle, but for me, actually, I think it's a very important thing. June's smiling, so I think potentially you agree with me. I'm not saying having read item 10 that popped into my mind. Maybe it did. So those are the two things that are in my mind at the moment. But obviously, I don't want to prejudge, obviously what the committee decides. And I think we need to learn a bit more about our role and how things all fit together. So that's my sort of view on the work programme. I mean, Nikki, is there anything you want to add on that?
In terms of CAMS, we have actually got it provisionally scheduled as an update, so members can actually get a baseline for the October meeting. So this would be something that even if we don't undertake a review of this subject, we still need to get an update on what's going on with that, given the impact of, there's an increase, as you heard earlier from the A&E and police item earlier. There's been a massive increase in the number of people presenting with mental health issues. This also includes young people. So young people, an increase in the number of young people using the services, or the demand on CAMS services is increasing, yet they haven't really been able to manage that demand prior to this increase. So it'll be interesting to see what they say when they come in October to then determine whether or not you do want to take that forward as a possible review topic.
I totally support that, because the outcome of the presentation here today tell us that it really is a massive thing that we need to look at, and it was just like shift aside, so we do need to pursue that. Support.
Thanks, June. Thanks, Nikki. Does anybody else have any comments on the work programme? Excellent. So we can move forward as we are. Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to go into part 2 now. Okay. For those who are watching on YouTube, we're about to cut the feed because we're going to move into part 2, which is our private matters for discussion. Thank you for watching us.